We're super excited to have you here today. We've been having these sessions going on the two different Zooms. So this is our first breakout session for thinking about the Holocaust and teaching for educators. So we're pleased to welcome Dustin Tenreiro from Facing History, Facing Ourselves. Facing History helps students connect choices made in the past to those they will confront in their own lives. So Facing History's resources address racism, anti-Semitism, and prejudice at pivotal moments in history. And so we're really excited to bring you here. Dustin is Associate Program Director for the organization. So he's really responsible for delivering program services, including outreach and working with teachers on the program and co-facilitating professional development. So if this is something you're interested in for your classroom, this is a great session to attend. And Dustin also brings education background from being a high school teacher in the humanities and designing curriculum for the humanities that covered World War II and world literature. So I think you bring a lot to the table. So we're thankful to have you here today to share some of the resources people could use for approaching Holocaust education.
Thank you so much, Aileen, and thank you, Kayla, and thank you to the Worcester Art Museum and really all the supporters of the symposium for this invitation. And I've heard and I trust that the day is going well so far. And so Aileen, did a little bit of my introduction before, but yeah, my name is Dustin Tenreiro, Associate Program Director here in the New England Regional Office. She mentioned I was a former classroom teacher. I was teaching in central Massachusetts, mostly high school as well. And really to sort of move us along with our limited time, really the goals and structure of really the sort of next half hour or 45 minutes, you can see on your screen. I'm going to provide a brief introduction to Facing History and ourselves. Maybe for those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, maybe some additional information for those of you who have been in contact with us or connected with us in some capacity. Then I'll also share our core Holocaust resources. Facing History and Ourselves was founded about 45 years ago, really with this core case study of Holocaust and human behavior. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then we'll move to connecting to the Neumann exhibit and really thinking about resources and teaching strategies that will support some of the themes that are connected to the elements of the Richard Neumann story, and thinking about memory and thinking about justice and restitution, and also thinking about the variety of ways that art can really embellish a unit or a study of the Holocaust. And hopefully we're going to hit that on a few different fronts as we move through the time together that we have today. So a little bit about Facing History first and foremost. We are a nonprofit organization. We have offices, 7, I believe, around the United States and 2 international offices. And our mission statement you can see on the screen here, it's really that we use lessons of history to challenge teachers and their students to stand up to bigotry and hate. We really think deeply about the voices of young people, the importance of learning about the Holocaust in so many different ways, so that they can ultimately exercise their civic voices and think about the choices that they are making. The content and themes that we cover with Facing History, we're a pretty big organization. We're founded really around Holocaust and human behavior, but we've branched out in so many different ways. So democracy and civic engagement is a huge part of the work that we've been doing in Facing History and Ourselves, especially recently with the new social studies frameworks here in Massachusetts, and also some of the state-based civic mandates around action projects. So we're also a recognized partner of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education here in Massachusetts and a provider of civics education. We also cover, a lot of hard histories, including race in American history, histories and resources based around human rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Eleanor Roosevelt, thinking about broader issues of justice, certainly tackling contemporary anti-Semitism and historical anti-Semitism, and thinking more broadly as well about religious intolerance, thinking about bullying and ostracism, global immigration, other genocides and instances of mass violence around the world. And certainly the reason why we're here today is to think about Holocaust and human behavior. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of like the span of work that we cover and how we can support teachers in schools. All of and everything that we do is really based around our pedagogical triangle. This really informs all of our work. And at the center, I mentioned, like, thinking of the voices of young people, thinking about their own civic agency and civic responsibility. That's a huge part of everything that we do, in studying the histories that we do, in bringing the resources and creating the teaching strategies that we support teachers with. And then you can see that there's 3 corners of this triangle. And at the top sort of point that you can see here, that's the intellectual rigor portion. As an educator, who taught social studies and world literature, I always wanted to focus in on critical thinking. Whenever possible, I also wanted to go deeper and have a little bit of that, I would always feel that tension of depth over breadth, right? Like, how much do I need to cover? How deep do I need to go so that students really feel that impact? And so intellectual rigor is really a core component of everything that we do, but also thinking about historiography and individual stories, and thinking about the narratives that we present as educators for the young people in our spaces. So that's that intellectual piece. On the lower right-hand corner, you'll see the ethical reflection portion of the triangle. And that's really about trusting young people to be moral philosophers in their own right, grappling with difficult questions about the past and the present. And then finally, the emotional. On the left-hand side, emotional engagement. As we're creating reflective learning communities, how do we become emotionally brave to hear the voices of others in history and the present? I found as a classroom teacher myself and working with educators throughout the region, that really the hearing the stories of folks like Richard Neumann, folks of, within the broader survivor community, hearing voices from all over the range of human behavior, of bystanders and so forth, that deepens the experience for young people. That increases the engagement for a large set of students. And so I think you're going to see through the resources I'm going to share where this comes in, right? And what we're going to do first, because I feel so strongly about this, is we're going to enter in to more of this sort of experience of learning about our resources with hearing just a short poem by a survivor who is very much connected with the Facing History community in the past, late survivor Sonia Weitz. And we're going to be just listening to her recite a poem that's called for Yom HaShoah, the Day of Holocaust Remembrance. And just a little bit of background information on Sonia. She was born in Krakow, Poland. She's 11 years old when her family and other Polish Jews were forced into ghettos by the Nazis. And ultimately, she survived, 5 concentration and death camps. And of the 84 members of her extended family, she and her sister were the only survivors. She turned to poetry at a young age and continued her love of poetry and her craft of poetry in the United States ultimately. So I thought it would be appropriate to bring her voice in before we learn a little bit more about Facing History's resources. So give me one moment to get that up and we will move along. All right, so here's Sonia.
Come, take this giant leap with me into the other world, the other place, where language fails and imagery defies, denies our consciousness and dies upon the altar of insanity. Come, take this giant leap with me into the other world, the other place, and trace the eclipse of humanity where children burned while nations stood by. And the universe has yet to learn why.
I think you're muted, Dustin. I think I see you speaking.
Thanks. I was just going to say, we're just going to pause for a moment. Thank you. To just sit with those words before I resume the share. I always like to enter into conversations around the Holocaust and work that we do with educators, bringing in survivor voices. I think it's an essential component of a Holocaust unit. And especially Sonia, I think her words are so poignant. And certainly with students, we would take this poem, we would have it printed in front of us. We would pick out the different words or phrases that resonated with us, that touched us in some sort of capacity, whether it was that emotional piece, or perhaps it was intellectual, or raise some ethical questions for young people. But that's just something that we do to sort of enter in a study of the Holocaust in a safe way, we believe. And we always want to make sure that we can exit in a safe way as well. So I'm going to resume the share here, and I think you can see a slide that says people make choices and choices make history. And so for us, it is sort of our tagline, but essentially it means that like the choices of individuals and groups matter, right? The Holocaust just didn't happen on a whim. It happened step by step. And the final solution needed the consent and complicity of not only leaders in Nazi Germany, but of many ordinary Germans as well. And so whether we're looking at a historical time period, whether it's the Holocaust or the Reconstruction era, or we're thinking about current events, people are making choices. Young people are making choices. They can create positive change in their community. They can help prevent anti-Semitism, racism, etc. in their communities. And then you can see some more additional language on the screen here as well. And we really believe that by focusing in on the choices of individuals who experience this history as victims, as witnesses, as collaborators, rescuers, perpetrators, students come to recognize really our shared humanity, which according to historian Doris Bergen, helps us see the Holocaust not just as a part of European or Jewish history, but as an event in human history, which really confirms the relevance of this history in our lives and our world today. We think that this approach helps students make connections between history and the consequences of our actions and beliefs today, and between history and how we as individuals make distinctions between right and wrong and good and evil. And so as students examine the steps that led to the Holocaust, they discover that history is not inevitable. It's the result of our individual and collective decisions. And so our resources, which I'm going to go into in just a moment, really bring together history, psychology, sociology, art, and literature to engage students with the Holocaust on a deeper level. And I think this is important, and it really distinguishes Facing History's approach from others, in that oftentimes Holocaust education really focuses solely on the number of victims, of dates, and perhaps even a rush to the death camps. And so we at Facing History like to slow it down. We want to think about all of the large and small steps that it took to get to that place, so that we can honor the victims, that we can recognize the fragility of democracy in Weimar Germany then, and the fragility of democracies around the world today. And that also we can inspire young people to use their voice, as I mentioned before, to follow their passions and bring positive change to their respective communities. And so I mentioned some really core resources before. Early on in this session. And Holocaust and Human Behavior is a resource that was updated probably about 4 or 5 years ago. It's a core resource that we've had sort of the skeleton of ever since our inception about 45 years ago, but that's been continually updated with new scholarship and so forth. This is sort of a large tome, I'd like to say, of a resource book. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages with lots of readings, and really designed for those who want to go deeper, right? And again, let me just take a step back. The Richard Neumann story is really remarkable, as is the exhibit. And a story certainly of tragedy, of resilience, and of hope. One that explores the themes of justice and healing that I mentioned before. And so, Holocaust and Human Behavior is really a great place to go deep. If you're someone who has been connected with Facing History for some time, and you really want readings and have the time in your classroom to go really deep on the Holocaust. The other piece that I'll mention here, that this book is available in both print and PDF form. It's also totally available for free on our website, broken down by table of contents, and every single reading is on our website. And I'll show you a slide of that in a moment. But I also wanted to just preview the structure, because this is something else that distinguishes Facing History from some other, Holocaust resources and whatnot. In that it's organized and designed around facing history's scope and sequence. And what this is sort of a thematic structure to thinking about a unit on the Holocaust. Or for me in the classroom, I started off using this with my Holocaust unit, and ultimately I used some of these themes throughout my World History 2 course. But we like to start off with the individual and society. We want to know and think about the dynamics of an individual person and the society that they live in. Who am I? How do I relate to other groups and people around me? What's my place in the broader society? How do others see me? So those are some of the big questions. And we want young people to be reflective in the classroom from their own identities, to really start with that and to think about it. And then we move into a portion called we and they, around group membership, thinking about the us and them, or the we and they dynamics that are sort of baked in to the human experience. And how do we recognize biases that we have? How do we recognize the choices that we make, and the groups that we're born into, and the groups that we choose to be a part of? And also how society can allocate different resources based on different facets of our identity that we may or may not have control of, right? So we like to think about that in the classroom atmosphere, and then transition it to the historical time period of the Holocaust. And that's really represented in the case study that you can see at the bottom. And then finally, we like to move students into a portion of a unit around justice, around legacies of the past, around memory, and then finally choosing to participate. How do I make good decisions in my life? How do the young people choose to not bully someone in the morning? How do they choose to welcome someone new on their bus in the morning, or in their classroom, and so forth, right? So thinking about small steps and really thinking about the young people in the spaces, and then sort of how it relates to the given history. And I think you can see that on the left-hand side of the screen here. This is essentially the table of contents for Holocaust and human behavior. And you can see here, well, that there's a get started portion and Spanish translations for some of the readings that we have. But you can see that it sort of follows that scope and sequence. 1 and 2 are really based around the individual and society, and we and they. And then we move into the case study through chapters 3 through 9, before we actually then move into issues of justice and judgment and so forth. So again, this is just a snapshot of some of the resources that we have. Another great resource, if you're someone who is really looking for just like, I need a unit, I need something to start with, I need something to help me understand, I want essential questions, I want lessons. Teaching Holocaust and Human Behavior is our shorter lesson-based resource, which is 23 lessons that looks at the history of the Holocaust. And you can see that it's also based around crafting an argumentative essay. It includes primary sources, videos, a number of other things here as well that can be helpful to you. So teaching Holocaust and human behavior, if you're looking for, I want a core unit, I want some lessons that I can just grab right now and bring right into my classroom. All right, whereas Holocaust and human behavior is the one for that sort of deeper work. All right. And so now I want to move a little bit further into the sort of contextual resources that I think are intrinsically tied to this exhibit and the Richard Neumann story. And so all of these are available on our website, as I mentioned before, for free. And many of them you can download as well. But there's a few resources that I wanted to make sure that I sort of called out and made and put them out there for you. And so one of them is Taking Austria. This is very much tied to the Richard Neumann story. And Taking Austria, this reading that we have, deals with the historical framework of the Anschluss and thinking about the experience of Jews in Austria at that time, which I think will provide some more of that contextual background information. And then the next reading I wanted to highlight is A Refugee Crisis, really following the annexation of Austria. And it's thinking about, the difficulty in leaving, quote unquote, Greater Germany. It was really not with the Nazis, who were faced with the problem of including an additional 200,000 Jews into the Reich. The Nazis were actually eager to see Jews leave the country as long as they left their money and other possessions behind. And certainly, as you probably know already, there is some legislation that's around that. as well, and we have resources connected to that as well. And really, the problem with refugees was with other nations, and most of whom had no interest in accepting thousands of penniless Jewish refugees. So I think that is something that we can think about in that historical context, and also think about the larger sort of legacies of this as well. But I also wanted to add that between 1,500 and 3,500 Austrian Jews applied for immigration visas to come to the United States in the days following the Anschluss. FDR was sympathetic really to their plight, but he believed that he didn't have the public support to ask Congress to change the quota system that had been in place for some time, under which the immigrants were admitted. And I wanted to showcase with you something in this reading that I think is especially interesting for educators and young people, is that there's a poll included that was published in Fortune magazine in 1938 that revealed quite a bit about public opinion in the United States. And at this point in time, just one facet of that poll was that 67% of folks who were polled, Americans, said, given our current conditions, we should keep them out. So that's something to consider and something to wrestle with, around that idea of ethical reflection, right? But then ultimately, acting on his own, Roosevelt combined the Austrian and Jewish quotas, and together they allowed more than 7,000 Jewish refugees to enter. And ultimately, the Evian Conference sort of came out of that as well, which obviously did not turn out the way that it should. And we see this continued refusal of many nation states to accept Jewish refugees at that time as well. And so one final reading really connected to this is Transitional Justice in Germany, which I think would be really interesting to connect to this exhibit and an exploration of it. It highlights really the multi-pronged approach to help both healing and justice. And it incorporates sort of a few different questions, which I think are amazing questions. And it's, can a nation as a whole be held responsible for crimes? Is it possible to make amends for genocide and crimes against humanity? What is owed to the victims? And the reading goes into that, and how Germany has made many moves over the following decades to try to address this sort of grave legacy. And it's meant many things for Germany, including paying reparations, building memorials, reforming education. But I think most folks think that there's a lot of aspects that have not gone far enough. But these German efforts really to make amends and to educate and to remember, again, they're neither perfect, they're not complete. We see a lot of troubling things bubbling up in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe as well, around the legacy and memory of the Holocaust as well. But in looking at specific polls and so forth, clearly these moves towards transitional justice are things worth talking about, worth uncovering, whether it's specific to restitution or whether it's connected to education and some of these other pieces as well. All right. So there are now on your screen, hopefully, some contextual resources around art that I wanted to just briefly put in front of you here. And the first one is a visual essay, The Impact of Propaganda. This is a set of propaganda images that has been sort of curated by Facing History and ourselves, along with some information based on those images and some strategies about how to approach this with your students. Not just throwing this at them, out of the blue and saying, hey, what do we think about this image? What do you think about that image? And so forth. But really having deeper conversations about what it means to have quote unquote positive and negative propaganda within the German Reich at this time. And so there's a lot of stuff there to sort of dig into. And also the second piece, really thinking about what was deemed to be sort of authentic German art, and what was deemed to be degenerate art within Nazi Germany. There's a great reading called Art and Politics, which really gets at some of the really, obviously troubling, problematic, but really like ethical questions that are going on at the time. And there's a companion video that goes along with that called Art as Propaganda, the Nazi Degenerate Art Exhibit, as well as, I think, a very interesting video if you have a lot of time and you want to go deep into German artists and what was going on with the art scene in the early days of Nazi Germany. And Jonathan Petropoulos, who's going to be here a little bit later on today, is actually featured as a scholar in this video as well. So that's certainly something to check out. teaching strategies in art, right? So it's like, I want to bring these things in. I want to use art in my classroom. How do I do it? What strategies can I incorporate so that I'm still working on, specific skills in my classroom, and we're working on all of those, the intellectual pieces and the emotional pieces as well. And so these are three that I think are great strategies to bring art into the classroom. One is called Crop It, and it's really about helping students interpret images by framing or cropping an image to one specific part and talking about what that image means to them, but also what that image may mean to the artist. What it there's layers of conversation that you can have around it, but it really allows students to zoom in on one specific portion of an image, of a piece of artwork, etc. It's a wonderful strategy. I've used it with students. I've used it with educators, and it's a great one to check out if you're not familiar with it. Analyzing images is a strategy that really, I think, allows young people to have that sort of critical thinking lens to looking at an image and putting it within that historical context as well. You can look at the questions that are sort of embedded in that lesson on our website. And then also there's another piece which I think is really great, See, Think, Wonder, which is like, let's take a step back. Let's just think about, like, what are we seeing here? How do we understand it? What are we wondering? What questions do we have about this piece of art and that we bring into the classroom? And I think also it's great for this collection that we have called Illuminations by a local survivor and artist, Samuel Bach. And I do want to just share his work briefly here as well, which I think really, it's all about memory, and it's all about experience, and it's all about voice. And it's channeled through Samuel Bach's artistic talents. And there's just one image here on the right, The Cup Was Full, which, I mean, you can spend a whole class period just talking about this piece of art. And what it means, using some of those different strategies and so forth. There's a lot on Sam Bach on our website as well, including documentary footage and all sorts of different things. But the quote in the middle, I think, is what really spoke to me when I first was shared Sam Bach's work and got to meet him at the Pucker Gallery in Boston. But one quote that he puts out there is, what's most important is that every person that gets in front of a painting tries to figure out by himself or herself its own riches, its own imagination, its own opening in order to stimulate thinking. And I think for young people who are perhaps afraid of interpreting art, they're afraid of stepping up and saying, like, I think this, or I see this, I see that. Like, this is a real liberating statement by the artist, right? Who's been through hell. And is really opening up the door for young people to have and to experience his art in a number of different ways and to come at it however they feel comfortable, right? So I think that that's something that is really, an amazing set of resources to explore. And again, all on our website, all free, all sort of collected there. I know we're sort of running short on time, but I would love to just be able to share a couple minutes of this video around memory and art, and specifically memorials, because this can be a really profound experience for young people in the classroom as well. And then we'll certainly have time for questions and so forth. So give me one moment just to get this going. Okay. Here we go, and if someone can just give me a good thumbs up.
Some like kind of almost a powder with water, and that will make like similar to like a liquid, almost like mud.
For this project, like, we really got to start from scratch. Or you know what? I'll grab one. The kids had some understanding of what the Holocaust was, but not on such a personal level, which I think was really impactful for me, that like I got to open up something for students that was not in my typical everyday being an art teacher. And it's a good crossover for me. I love history, but this was a very personalized history for most of our students. They felt very connected when they watched video and photography and things. They were like, wait, they took pictures of this? It really affected them in a very different way, having that visual imagery. So I think having that kind of cross of the arts and history, and then now like chemistry and like figuring things out. We've had so many different ideas and prototypes coming through in the last 2 months that we're kind of finally breaking things down and deciding what this monument's going to look like for the school and for the community and for these kids to really make that connection. They don't learn about the Holocaust until 8th grade. And so that's why I worked with the humanities middle school teacher. She has been helpful in collaborating with me. They had a hard time with a lot of the memorials and monuments that had like this sadness. Like they're very positive, uplifting kids. So they're like, oh, everything's so sad. Like, why does it have to be so sad? And they thought, well, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for the fact that people survived, and there's this legacy that lives on. So they wanted that to be impactful for viewers, that like we are here because we are, you know, we lived past something that was tragic, and that we grow from that, and that it can't be forgotten, it's going to be remembered, but that we are here and we are happy and we're moving forward. I've given them so far this year through Facing History a lot of content. So much content. They have so much context. They have so much research under their belt that they really are leading this project into what they want to express to their audience.
But during our research, we came across like a lot of sculptures that included hands. Like everyone in our class liked the idea.
So each student has their own like part of it that they're working on. So the clasped hands of like Alyssa and her grandfather, it'll be their clasped hands as a survivor, and then as her as like the next generation that's going to carry that like legacy of remembering. And then for the other students who don't have that immediate connection of somebody who's a survivor, they wanted their hands involved. So since 2 of our students have connections with survivors, grandparents and such of the Holocaust, 2 of them want to have their hands clasped with their grandparent, which I think is really cool. So on that, it'll have, you know, their 2 hands clasped. We'll do a casting of that. So that's their personal aspect.
We're gonna do my hand with my grandpa's and Matt's hands with his grandpa. My grandpa's a Holocaust survivor. And for me, this means a lot because I'm learning many other stories.
Mia and my grandpa are gonna like hold hands like that, like this kind of. Yeah, and Alyssa and her grandpa are gonna hold hands like that. Yeah, so it's kind of like from generation to generation is the meaning, kind of. Then like the rest of the class is gonna do hands like this, and we're gonna have like plants in it.
They love the Andy Goldsworthy Memorial and Monument that has something growing from a stone. And so they liked the idea of having their hands open and that something is growing from it. So they really want this idea of like life and moving forward.
So like the cement hands is like they were hardened, like I've never heard the term like battle hardened, like people who like saw somebody die, they were hardened, they were broken almost, or something like cement that has hardened literally, and then it's creating new life. The plants are growing from it. It's really special to me to have my grandpa still alive with me today. I mean, it's still generation to generation, so I'm getting his story currently, so it's like I'm soon going to be the one passing on the story. It's like really cool to have us actually build something that I could take for my life that we made in honor of these people.
All right, give me one more moment to get that slides back here. Okay. So along with that along with that video, there's lessons and readings that go along with analyzing memorials and also creating memorials. So it's more of that experiential sort of piece. After we look at some different memorials that have been created, and we think about their audience, and we think about the artists that created them, now young people can also engage in activity to create their own memorials. And I've seen some really remarkable ones over the years. I'm not going to go through all the guiding questions and learning objectives here, but I think it's also, a good place for us to stop. I mean, we started really with a survivor voice, and we're ending really with the voices of young people and of an educator that's engaging in this work in the classroom. I could go on and on about facing history and talk about resources throughout the course of the day. I know our time is limited, but I would also invite anyone to feel free to email me. You can see my email address on the screen now at Dustin Tenreiro at facinghistory.org. And I'm happy to connect and answer further questions and so forth. But I think we have some time now in case folks have initial questions. I know it was a lot to present in a short period of time, and it may take time to sink in. But if there's any questions or thoughts or comments, happy to take them now.
Thank you so much, Dustin. That was an absolutely wonderful presentation with a lot of great resources for everyone to continue looking at and engaging with. Since we are such a nice group here, if anyone has questions, feel free to unmute themselves and you can ask Dustin. So we'll take it from here. Anyone who'd like to ask questions? Well, I would happily start. I do have a question myself. So in the beginning of your presentation, you were mentioning how you like to enter and exit this content safely, I think is the word you used. And I found that really interesting because I know that these issues can be really hard and really even shocking to some kids who are learning about it for the same time. And so I was just really curious, especially about what you mean, like what you mean by especially exiting safely. I find that topic very fascinating. So I just love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important question, and it's I think one of the foundational pieces of facing history in ourselves. And I think as an educator, when I first came to the organization, when I came to some professional development, when I was still teaching in the classroom, I was really shaped profoundly by the pedagogical triangle, and really thinking as of these young people, trusting young people with difficult and challenging issues. And I think an important piece is creating not only safe spaces, but safe and reflective spaces, and not only safe and reflective spaces, but safe, reflective, and brave spaces. We want young people to be able and to encourage them to take positive risks in the classroom. We certainly don't want to inflict any kind of trauma on young people. By looking at certain histories, it's going to hit students in different ways, based on their own sense of identity and group membership and so forth. And so we really think that teachers need to be conscious of this, and that teachers need to start with themselves and to do their own sort of reflection on their own identity and what they bring to the table, as well as their group membership. And how does that, how can they use facets of their identity and their group membership to foster these communities in the classroom? And I think part of it is contracting with students, really from sort of day one, really trying to create relationships in the classroom and sharing with whatever you feel comfortable, facets of your identity and facets of your sense of group membership, but learning about students that way and having them create identity charts for themselves, which is a strategy I didn't go over today, but an amazing one. But really fostering that classroom community and taking the necessary time to do it. Ultimately creating a classroom contract around norms that bubbles up organically and democratically from the students in the class and their teacher, their educator who's present, and really all signing off on it and saying, these are the things that we want to be present in our classroom. We want to be able to trust one another. We want to be comfortable a little bit with discomfort. We want to, if somebody says something that's off-putting, we want to sort of target the idea, not the person that's putting it out there. So there's a number of different norming and contracting strategies that we also have on our website as well, which I think is like really the start of creating that safely in, safely out sort of piece. Once you get into a difficult history, trying to manage that time so that you have ample time at the end of the class for silent reflection, for whole group reflection, to journal, to do a color symbol image activity where they can sort of process in so many different ways, whatever they feel comfortable with, so that they're not just leaving with a jarring image or, a really tragic story, which is certainly a part of, a unit on the Holocaust. So that's a great question. We have a lot of resources, again, all for free at facinghistory.org as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I see Martha put online resources amazing. Martha, can I ask what school or what district you're coming from?
I'm from Lesley University, Dustin.
Oh, great.
I've been working in arts integration for 50 years now. I just retired, but facing history, I've been to so many of your sessions, and I just think what you're doing is amazing. I'm thrilled that it was part of the program today, and I realize that the docents are drawn in many different ways, but it would be lovely if there could be a special session for the docents at the Art Museum, because with the Neumann exhibit, I think there are careful ways of engaging as you've described it, and but the questions have to come up, and it's an opportunity for relating what's happened in the Holocaust with what's happening today, and some strategies for people bringing their own experience into that exhibit when they're coming into the Worcester Art Museum, I think would be extremely helpful for all of us. So I know Aileen's listening and in on this. So I'm hoping that we can bring you back out when it's not this symposium, but rather a time when the docents could have more opportunities to learn from you, because your strategies and your careful approach and your thoughtful, just your triangle alone is something that I think we can all share in our teaching. So thank you.
Thank you, Martha. It's great to hear. And yeah, we've had some, we've had connections with Lesley for a long period of time as well. So it's great to have you here. Thanks for being here. And Suzanne put into the chat, what was the prompt for the memorial project? So I put that up on the screen. If you can still see that, Suzanne, around thinking about like the purpose, what impact do they have? What's important to remember, right? Like what's the intended audience? How do we ensure history is not forgotten, right? So there are actually a number of different lessons that we have around analyzing memorials, but then also, as I showed the video, like let's create something as well. And it doesn't need to be as big or as extensive as the example that you saw here. I've seen it in such a variety of classrooms. In some cases, it takes one class period. In other cases, it's a much larger project, and they choose to exhibit it. I visited a number of exhibitions of memorials and work throughout the region prior to COVID. And I've seen, really some remarkable work by young people, and they're you can see the impact on them that the history has had through what they're creating, and the messages that they're sending through it, which to me is really, impactful and profound as an educator myself, but as a human being, I think as well, right? It's impactful and profound.
I'm thinking that the memorial might be a way for young people to respond, some kind of a memorial artwork to the Neumann exhibit. That might in fact be, because there's so many aspects of both the history, the art, and the individual, that doing something that would be a memorial to this man or to this time or to this work might be a great way to start the conversation.
I think that's a great suggestion, Martha. Thank you. I know we're sort of getting close on time, so any other questions or comments as we move on?
If anyone has one more question, we could do one more question before we wrap up.
And if not, feel free to, and I'll put the other slide back up, to send me an email, and we can sort of connect in different ways.
Well, thank you so much, Dustin. This was excellent, and I myself can't wait to explore the Facing History in Ourselves website just to see all these resources, because there's really just a fountain of free and accessible resources for all of us. So we really thank you for coming today.
Yeah, your resources are amazing. I didn't realize quite how much you had for free, so that's super helpful for people, I think.
Thanks, Aileen, and it was great to be here with everyone. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the symposium.